Hello everybody, Division here. Welcome back to my channel. Now, I'm sorry that I haven't uploaded for a few days. I've just been trying to get together a good compilation of stories, which you are listening to right now. Anyway, if you hear a difference between the speeds I read, the reason is that I'm trying to find a good narrating cadence. So let me know which story has the cadence sounds the best, and let me know in the comments down below. Also, remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and also be sure to check out my Twitter. Anyway, without further ado, prepare to get spooked. The Angry Ananazi Spirits of Southern Utah by Greyfall. This story takes place in the Red Rock Deserts of southern Utah, in the Canyon of Cane Gulch, to be precise, for those brave enough to reenact this story. My family has always loved the great outdoors, and every weekend we were out doing something that involved being in nature. Things like kayaking, mountain biking, hiking, backpacking, you name it. I was 7 years old when this trip took place, and my dad had won a lottery to obtain a permit to camp in Cane Gulch, southern Utah, which is a land that is beloved by my family for its rugged terrain and serene beauty. This particular canyon is well known for having multiple cliffside dwellings of the ancient Anasazi people, so intact even after hundreds of years. You can still see the cobs of the corn they ate, the feathers of the turkeys they raised and slaughtered, ancient fragments of pottery they created when they still roamed those lands. All of which could still be found among the arcane houses, like they were just there a few days ago. The plan for the first night was to hike 7 or 8 miles into the designated campsites at the end of the canyon and camp there for the night. The hike itself took you right underneath what must have been about a dozen Anasazi dwellings, which you could actually climb into with the ladders that they made into the soft sandstone cliffs all those centuries ago. Each set of ruins was marked on our map, so we knew exactly where every ruin was on our way. It's very important to note that no one is allowed to take anything from these sites, which we all followed to the letter. Not only is it extremely illegal and unethical, but each time you summited their ladders and stood inside their catacomb-like houses, a heavy presence weighed on you. I'm not sure if it was just the sense of knowing just how ancient those buildings are, or something more supernatural. But I assure you, it always felt like someone, somewhere, would know if you took anything. The hike itself was long and grueling. It was a high desert at the tail end of summer, and we were lugging around dozens of pounds on our backs all day. Every time we passed by a ruin we could all easily reach, we took a short break and explored it. The day passed on like this, uneventful, fun, and tiring, until at last we came upon the backcountry campsite cluster deep in the wilderness. There were several sites to choose from, with each campsite being about 100 yards away from the next. Once I saw the very first campsite, I was immediately adamant that we set up camp there. I really insisted that we set up camp at this particular camping site. But we had the entire campground to choose from, as we were the only ones there. And my parents wanted a tree for shade to shelter us from the scorching late afternoon desert sun, which this site didn't have. I refused yet again. This campsite. I want this campsite. My parents, and even myself at the time, just thought that I wanted the site because it was the first one we came across, and I was whiny and tired. That was definitely true. I was only like 7 at the time. But something else drew me to that site. But alas, I was overruled, and on we hiked until we settled into a site with a grand old cottonwood tree. I'm talking, this tree was easily over 200 years old. It was so massive. Definitely a tree capable of providing all the shade we could ever need. Its canopy spanned at least 100 feet. Anyway, we set up camp and settled in as the sun began to wane closer to the western horizon and evening set in. As we all went about our downtime waiting for dinner, I remember a feeling. You know, that sense you get when you think you're being watched. Sometimes the eyes felt like they were down the trail where we came from. Sometimes they were in that large bush 20 feet to your left, or they felt like they were just over your shoulder. That feeling got so strong in me, I remember asking my parents if they felt it too. Partially to my relief, and partially to my disappointment, they also mentioned that they felt eyes on them. My mom was sitting on a rock, writing in her notebook about the trip so far, when she looked down at her shoe and saw a half-dollar-sized piece of archaic pottery. Deep earthen brown and speckled with an ornate wave-like design. Strange, she thought, and later recounted to me years after this. What's this doing here? There's no ruins nearby, I don't think. She turned her gaze up beyond the canopy of the cottonwood tree, and there, plain as day, was a set of Anasazi ruins, completely unmarked on our map. Probably 100 yards away and 30 feet up the canyon walls. There it sat, strong, like the earth they were made from. Primordial, dried clay dwellings of a bygone era stood steadfast, watching over our sight. At this point in the day, I was too tired and no longer thrilled at the prospect of investigating another set of ruins. I've been in and out of them all day, and these surely can't be any different. The sun continued its arc across the sky, and soon kissed the western horizon, the eyes never blinking, never looking away the rest of the afternoon. Dinner was served and eaten, and we retreated to a symphony of frog croaks, along with coyote howls, owl hoots, and bug buzzing that was so loud it was almost deafening. I remember my dad, bathed now in the soft, ethereal glow of the moonlight, pretending to be an orchestra conductor, directing the animals of the world in their song of the night. It really took the edge off and is one of my favorite memories of the trip. We fell asleep in our sleeping bags on the ground that night, right underneath the largest branch of the cottonwood tree. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the tree would shelter us from rain if something unexpected were to happen. And unexpected things did happen. As we were sleeping, that very same branch, hundreds of years old and withstanding all the storms and extreme weathers southern Utah can offer, collapsed. My family and I all woke up to a terrible creaking noise right above us, like a tree in a hurricane, as the wood and branches contort and twist. There was no wind this night, but the branch ached and groaned just the same. We began getting up and moving just as the first splitting noises were heard, followed by a thunderous clap and crash as several tons of wood spout from the tree and slammed into the ground where our heads lay just seconds before. Terrifying for sure, but we had no time to react to our near-death experience. The sagebrush and drought-riddled bushes all around our campsite began rustling violently. Again, there was no breeze here, but dozens of bushes all around us began rattling, like hundreds of angry rattlesnakes. For the second time tonight, all of us were deafened. Being the dead of night and definitely out of our logical minds, my parents packed me up, turned on our headlights, and just ran down the trail. Following us down the trail, the once motionless bushes rattled to life as we passed them, heading to another campsite. After what felt like an eternity of being scared crapless, but in reality, probably 7 to 10 seconds, we arrived at another campsite. One with no trees or anything, just a large, empty circle. As we entered the campsite, the rustling ceased immediately, and the sounds of the animal orchestra took over. Calming, peaceful. After a dozen minutes or so, my dad mustered up the courage to return to our old campsite to retrieve our sleeping bags and stuff, and brought them back to our new haven for the night. We eventually calmed down, and then we fell back asleep. In the morning, I instantly recognized where we were. It was the very first campsite on the trail, and the one that I was so drawn to. Needless to say, we had a quick breakfast that morning, and we immediately gathered our stuff at the cursed site, preparing to hike back out immediately. As we were packing up what we left in our terror, I looked up to where the ruins that weren't marked on the map were, and instead, all I saw was a painted limestone canyon wall. One that has stood for millions of years and has probably never been touched by humans. And now, gone were the ruins we saw yesterday. I pulled my dad aside and asked him if he saw the same thing. And to my horror, he looked briefly in between packing up the cooking gear and said, "Yup, there's nothing there. They're not there anymore." But then again, after last night, that doesn't even surprise me anymore. And I really get the feeling that we need to leave. So hurry and help us pack. I get the feeling that we need to leave. Yes. That was the feeling I felt this morning. That's another thing that was different. Gone were the watchful eyes, and here now was just the feeling of being a trespasser. I obediently began helping my parents pack up camp, and we were back on the trail within the hour. Now, I can actually happily say that the rest of the trip went fine. The malicious feeling that consumed the pit of our stomachs dissipated about a mile down the trail. Now, I've always believed in ghosts and spirits, and I could tell that they were pleased to see us be on our way and wouldn't mess with us anymore. Horror is my favorite genre, and I've experienced more possibly supernatural events, and have encountered some cryptid-like animals in my travels in the wild since. But this trip was what took it for me to believe that there are forces at play we don't, and probably will, never understand. If any listeners ever get lucky enough to experience the beauty of Cane Gulch in southern Utah, please, please be respectful. Pack out what you pack in. Respect the wildlife, obey trail rules, and perhaps, most importantly, make sure you knock and wait for approval before entering somebody's house. Even if the person isn't there anymore, they will still know who has trespassed. Abandoned Reform Schools and Spirit Boards by Tatted Big Guy. I'm sorry if this is a bit long, but I do hope that it gives you even a fraction of the fear and terror I felt the night I decided to visit an old abandoned boys' reform school. A little history, and feel free to dig further if you'd like, but the Stonewall Jackson Youth Development Center is located in the town of Concord, North Carolina. It was opened in 1909 as a school and detention center for unruly and troubled boys. Now, the school is located on a campus of about 800 acres of land, and originally had about 50 to 60 structures built on it. Rumor has it that many things went on in this school, ranging from abuse to rumors of eugenics and forced sterilization practices. At its peak, this school was believed to house up to 500 people, which were mostly comprised of students and faculty. So, now that we got the basic history down, I'll get into my personal terrifying experience from this school. It was about 2009, in my senior year of high school. I was young, I was dumb, and at the time, I was unknowingly considered a creeper. My natural curiosity kicked in the first time that I had heard of this abandoned and supposedly haunted school that wasn't too far from where I lived, and I had heard many stories about friends going, and then getting feelings of great sadness, pain, and even torture. So naturally, I had to check it out. I had decided that Halloween was the perfect time to go on this spirited adventure. So I, along with 3 friends, decided to pack up our bags and spend the entire day and night exploring the property and seeing if the stories of hauntings were in fact true. In our bags, we had packed all the necessary things for a full 24-hour discovery trip of this haunted school. The things we packed included flashlights, extra clothes, extra batteries, snacks, water, and of course, a Ouija board. We arrived mid-afternoon, and after ignoring multiple no trespassing signs, we had finally set foot on the property. Almost immediately, we all felt a subtle chill. The buildings were all overgrown and falling apart, with spray paint spread across the faces of each building. There were broken and boarded up windows and doors on a lot of these buildings, and trash littered the knee-high grass as we made our way through to the first building. Although it was midday, there was still this very creepy and almost eerie feeling once we were inside the dark, damp building. We ventured through the first couple of buildings, not finding much, other than some old toys, trash, and some old clothes left there by previous visitors. As the sun started to go down, the property began to not only disappear into the shadows, but it began to feel darker, and we began to feel as though we were being watched, possibly followed. However, there were no noises or sightings of anything, just a severely uncomfortable feeling. After not finding much within our first few hours of exploring, we decided to bring out the Ouija board and see if anything would like to come forward. We find a good spot just in the entryway of one of the old buildings known to have sightings of ghosts, which was known as the Daughter's Cottage. So we decided to use it as our game house. The four of us positioned ourselves in a circle, set the board up, and began playing, asking the usual questions that are usually asked in these scenarios. Is anybody here? What is your name? What's your story? Etc. We also asked a series of multiple questions with no reply, and we began to get bored. Just before we decided to put the board away and continue on our adventure, one of my friends decided to taunt whatever may be there to try and get a reaction. And with all our fingers still on the planchette, he yells, "Hey, why don't you make yourself known, you freaking pussy?" Almost immediately, we heard a door slam. And just after that, 3 of our 4 flashlights go out, with the only flashlight left on belonging to the one that had decided to tease these spirits. He quickly grabs his light and shines it in the direction of the sound of the door slam, only to see that there is no door on the hinge. The only door in our sight was the broken door that led us into the building. As we slowly backed out of the room towards the door we came through, we began to hear creaking noises coming from above us, as if someone, or rather something, was walking directly above us. He shines his light towards the ceiling just in time to see a brick fall right above us, nearly hitting him in the head as he jumps out of the way. In the second the brick hit the floor, all of our flashlights turned back on. After this, we quickly grab our bags and run, leaving our water bottles, snacks, and that godforsaken Ouija board. We make it about 30 feet off the front porch of this dilapidated cottage, and then we turn to look behind us. As soon as our lights hit the front of the building we were just in, all 4 of us froze. In the upstairs window, just above the front door, the room where we had left our belongings behind, we see a figure. This figure was of a man who was probably in his mid-30s or 40s wearing a black suit. Our flashlights reflected off his glasses, and we could just make out enough details on his face to see that he is smiling and staring right at us. Frozen in terror, we all stood there for about 5 seconds, locked in an intense stare-down with this man in the upstairs window. The only thing that broke our gazes was the sound of glass breaking, and a child's laughter echoing through the air. We didn't know where the sound of the broken glass or the laughter came from, but we hightailed it out of there. We ran as we'd never run before. We didn't stop until we were all back at the car. And when we reached it, we jumped straight in, peeled off, and never looked back. To this day, we still believe that we were run out of the building by a vengeful spirit of a teacher. And for about 2 days after this incident, all of us had felt some sort of darkness surrounding us. I can't quite explain it, but it felt as if something may have followed us. Maybe that's why the man in the window was smiling. I'm not sure, but I do know one thing. I will never touch a Ouija board again. I've since been back to the school and other various supposedly haunted places since then, and have felt and seen various things, but nothing like that night in the cottage. So take my advice. Don't play with Ouija boards, or you may regret it. Demon in the Doorway by Yo Stevo. It seems that more people than one would think tend to experience some form of paranormal activity within their life. Some seem to be more fantastic than others, and believe me, I've heard my share of both. I like to listen to a lot of stories on Darkness Prevail's YouTube channel, mostly viewer submission true accounts, dealing with the paranormal and the like. But honestly, I never really expected that I'd be sharing my personal experiences with strangers one day. I've had so many paranormal encounters within my life, so it's difficult deciding exactly where to start. But I guess I'll begin with my most terrifying. When I was 16 years old, I was spending the summer visiting my Nana and Papa, which is grandparents for those of you not raised by a Southern family. They lived on about 20 acres in a small town in central Oklahoma. There were miles of farmland all around, and neighbors were few and far between. Seriously, I mean their nearest neighbor lived about a quarter of a mile away. She happened to be my great aunt. It was extremely peaceful and quiet, although at night it could sometimes feel a little bit ominous. As you entered the property off the main road, there was a long gravel driveway leading up to the house. After about 80 feet, you could either go left and pull into the driveway, or continue straight and head towards the barn. About 100 yards beyond the barn was a graduating slope that separated a very large spring-fed pond from the main property, which, by the way, had some of the best wide-mouth bass and crappie fish that I've ever had in my life. Their house was a single-level, 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch-style home with an attached 2-car garage. As you walked through the front door to the left of the garage, you entered the living room. To the left was a hallway that led to the bedrooms and bathrooms. The main bathroom on the first floor was on the right, and the guest room where I slept was the second door on the right at the end of the hall. My grandparents, of course, slept in the master bedroom, directly across the hall from my room. They had an attached bathroom, which was only used by my papa, so it wasn't uncommon to see my Nana just shuffle across the hall in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. She even kept a nightlight by the bathroom door for that very purpose. Now, I don't scare very easily, and like I said, I've experienced the paranormal on several occasions, most of which happened at my old house in Utah, but those are stories for another time. Nonetheless, something about the hallway in particular at this house really creeped me out. I'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and then feel like something was watching me from the end of the hallway. My Nana kept an antique fabric doll on a small table at the end of the hallway, and even though it looked somewhat creepy, it never really freaked me out. No, it wasn't that. It was something else. Something foreboding, and I could feel it from time to time, just leering at me as if it was intentionally trying to make me uncomfortable. So, one afternoon I had just fed and watered the cows and was eating lunch and watching some TV before I went fishing. My Nana was in the kitchen, and my pawpaw was out on his tractor about 3 miles away in the north pasture, just baling hay. As I took a bite from my sandwich, out of nowhere, I started to get that uncomfortable feeling again. Hesitantly, I looked left down the hallway, and I swear to you, I saw that antique doll, by itself, turn completely to the right, so it's now facing my grandparents' bedroom. I froze with my mouth full of half-chewed sandwich, and my jaw slacked open, trying my best not to make a big deal out of it. I calmly go back to watching TV, but seconds later, I couldn't help myself but to look again. So nervously, I look back down the hallway, only to discover the doll has turned 180 degrees and is now facing my bedroom. There are no train tracks in the area, and the kind of vibrations that it would have taken to cause that to happen would have been felt throughout the entire house. Needless to say, I and the rest of my sandwich left to go fishing. Later on that night, long after they had gone to bed, I was getting tired myself and decided that I had delayed going to bed long enough. I told myself that I was being silly and there wasn't anything to be afraid of. So, I manned up and made my way towards the bedroom, telling myself along the way, "It's no big deal, dude. Just go to bed." As I stepped through the doorway, I made it a point to say quietly but out loud, "You don't scare me. Leave me alone." Yeah, challenge accepted, I guess. A short while after I had fallen asleep, I shot up in bed wide awake, as if somebody was urgently trying to get my attention. The bed I was sleeping in faced a closet, and if you looked slightly to the right, there was the doorway to the bedroom. I always sleep with the bedroom door open, and if you looked out, all you could see was the hallway wall that dimly reflected the nightlight from the bathroom. As I turned my head to look at the doorway, I saw a solid, black human-shaped figure just standing at the entryway. At first, I tried telling myself that it was just my Nana, stopping to look in on me on her way to the bathroom. But no, I knew that wasn't the case. I had seen her make that trip in the middle of the night many times, and it never looked like this. This thing, or whatever it was darker than any shadow I'd ever seen in my entire life. It's so hard to put into words, but even though this thing was featureless, I could tell that it was looking right at me. And as horrifying as it was to look at, the feeling it gave me was even worse. I can't even begin to explain the level of negativity and evil that was emanating from it. And just as I'm trying to process all this, suddenly it made a motion like I was going to enter my freaking room. In that same moment, as I lay there petrified and knowing full well at any second this abomination was going to be even closer to me, it failed to breach the threshold. I mean, it's like something was preventing it from coming into the room, as ridiculous as that sounds. It's as if there was some sort of invisible force field preventing it from coming in. It's not like that stopped it from trying, though. Over and over, it repeatedly tried to come in, and with every attempt, I grew more and more nervous and terrified that it was finally going to succeed. I thought about yelling out for help, but honestly, I didn't want to have my grandparents come rushing out, only to discover nothing, and then have to try to explain this fiasco. Or worse, risk the chance of my grandparents actually encountering this thing and have them die of a heart attack or something. So the only thing I could think to do was to pull the covers up over my head like a child and pray for God to take this thing away. I'm not an extremely religious person, but at the moment, it seemed like the right way to go. I mean, what the hell would you do? And don't give me that, "I would've just blah blah blah" bullcrap. You would've crapped yourself, just like I did. I didn't even peek out from under the covers to see if it was gone, because I just knew that if I did, it either wouldn't be gone, or worse, it would be standing there, right next to me. And I wasn't willing to roll those dice. I even pinched myself hard to make sure I wasn't just having a nightmare. After that, I stayed under the covers like that and prayed until I finally fell asleep. I woke up in the morning to the smell of bacon cooking, the sun shining, and everything back to normal. I debated calling any of my folks and having them put me on an earlier flight back home, but in the end, I decided that I wasn't going to let this experience ruin my summer vacation and deny me time with the people that I love. And I'm glad I stayed. They're both gone now, and leaving early is something that I would have regretted doing for the rest of my life. I never saw that thing again, and strangely enough, the hallway didn't creep me out as it used to anymore. I did finally ask my Nana if she had ever experienced any ghost activity there, though, and she said,
"Well, I've seen a couple of weird things, but if you don't pay it any attention, it'll leave you alone."
As I mentioned earlier, I've had several paranormal encounters in my life, but no matter how tough that you think you are, or how much you think the paranormal doesn't bother you, nothing can prepare you for an experience like that. My mom and I saw a ghost car. By Grimoire Caddy Vengeance. Hey everybody, I am back with some creepy stories regarding the place I grew up in. I had a good sit down recently with my mother to reminisce about some of the happenings, and one in particular really stood out. A little background for why my mom and I were out in the first place. My sister is in a marching band throughout all 4 years of her high school. Usually, I would tag along with my parents. Well, just my mom, actually, as we drove my sister to her football games and competitions, because this usually meant that Mom would stop at an Exxon before heading home. And since Exxon had candy bars, this usually meant that I could talk my way into a cookies and cream candy bar, which was a favorite treat of mine back then. It was later in the fall around this time, and as usual, I went along with my mom to drop my sister off at the game. I think my sister was staying with one of her friends afterward that night. Either that, or she was with my grandmother because we didn't stay to watch. After dropping her off, we went home. Now, our home was pretty isolated, about 40 minutes from the high school, give or take, so it was dark out by the time we were in sight of the Kenna Exxon. For those of you who don't know, Kenna is a tiny, tiny city in Jackson County, West Virginia, with not much more than a post office, the Exxon, the elementary school, and a restaurant. This time, however, instead of turning into the Exxon, my mom turned left onto a road which I believe was called Kentuck Road. There were some disagreements on this, but bear with me, as I'm still trying to remember the details as best as I can. I gave my mom a disappointed look, but realized she was staring nervously into the rearview mirror. Now, the road is mostly downhill at the start, passing the restaurant that I mentioned before, which was called Patty's Country Cookin' for anyone interested, and I suddenly realized that the headlights behind us were riding extremely close to our bumper. My mom is a nervous driver, having been in a few car accidents in the past, and she doesn't like it when people ride too close to her. So she glanced at me and said, "I'm just going to pull over and let this guy pass when we get to a wide spot." I remember nodding in agreement to this, because while I could not make out any details of the car behind us, even I could recognize that they were uncomfortably close. So, we make it to the bottom of the road, and my mother pulls into this big wide spot that's just on the left of the road. And then, nothing. No headlights past us, they just vanished. We both sat there for what was probably 5 minutes, just staring. Finally, my mother looked at me and asked, You saw a car, right?" To which I had nodded. "Yeah, Mom, I did. I did." At this point, I had goosebumps all over. "Did you see them pass us?" she asked me, staring at the road. "No, Mom, I didn't." We sat there a little longer, staring at the road together. There isn't anywhere that the car could have pulled off behind us, and the road is a straight stretch at the bottom of the hill. So we would have seen their headlights pass us, and we would have seen their taillights as well. It looked like a big car, given the height difference, the headlights that had been riding the bumper of my mom's 2003 or 2004 Buick LeSabre. So if it had come over the hill, we definitely would have heard something. So yeah, I'm pretty sure my mom and I encountered a ghost car that night. In addition to that one encounter, my mother informed me that she had had similar experiences like that numerous times on that same road when she was only driving alone. Sometimes the car would be riding her bumper and vanish if she pulled over, like when I was with her. Or she'd be just following taillights, just to watch them disappear right in front of her eyes. My dad has also confirmed that he also had a couple of experiences like that himself, though they aren't the most harrowing experiences. It was still frightening at the time. And to witness something like that firsthand, it really shook me up. Well, those are some pretty terrifying true tales. I have to say, The Ouija board one was my favorite, because it shows what can happen if you use a Ouija board when you don't know what you're doing, or how to protect yourself. You always gotta remember to shield and banish if you ever use one of those. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed this story, and subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, life can be truly terrifying. Good night.